Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf ayin in 70 in Maseches Avodah Zarah. We are in the last chapter of Avodah Zarah. Let me share my screen and we'll really get started. So
70A,
70A1 is where we're up to.
Gotcha.
Today we begin on the third line of Daf Ayin Omid Aleph 70A as we pick up with a series of 12 stories involving idolaters and Jewish-owned wine. So let's take a look. 12 stories, and that's going to be our entire daf. Maybe if we finish early, we can do the Mishnah, but probably we'll just leave that for tomorrow. So the Gemara relates now 12 stories. In each case, an idolater was found or left alone with Jewish-owned wine, and as a result, the question is what is the status of that wine? And so again, we are on the third line of Ayin Omid Aleph, and we start Hahu Beisa. There was a house Dahaba Yosef Bey Chamra Yisrael, where there was wine that belonged to a Jew. Al Ovid Kochavim Achada Lidasha Ba'ape. The Ovid Kochavim, the idolater, went up into the house. Achada. Now, Achada is interesting because it could mean close or it could mean lock. And he closed and locked the door behind him, and so as a result, he was alone with the wine. V'hava biza bidasha, and there was a window in the door, much like the door in our room right now. We have a window in the door. Ishtikach ovid kochavim dekai beini dane, and the idolater was found among the barrels. So Amarava. So the question is do we have to be worried that he got into the barrels and made the barrels yayin nesech because they were Jewish owned and they were kosher barrels that anybody could use and the Jew that owned them could benefit from? So Rava says, Kol dilahade biz'ashari. As long as the barrel could be seen from the window in the door, so then it's going to be permitted. The high gisa v'high gisa asur. But if it's on one side or the other side, and therefore not visible, well, then it would be prohibited. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi helps us and clarifies that what do we mean when we say permitted? So Rashi's second line, Ayin Omid Aleph, Dilahadi Biza Shari, that when it's invisible from the window, it's going to be permitted. Af b'shtia, even to drink. It's not just talking about benefit. We're even saying that it's kosher, completely kosher. Demirsas below naga, because the person is going to be afraid that somebody is going to look in and see it, and then you're going to, and therefore he won't touch it. But the high gisa v'high gisa asur. But when it comes to whether the barrels that are on one side or the other, we're talking about, have a seat, Mark. We're talking about if you can see in and
no
see
sound.
somebody among barrels, well, then if you see them near
Lost the sound.
if you see the barrels, it's going to be kosher. And if you don't see the barrels, well, then you have to be worried that the non-Jew who was in the room with the barrels got into them. So, and as Rashi says, again, third line on Ayin Omid Aleph, Rashi, Gisa the high Gisa the high Gisa Asur, Af Bahana, you're not even allowed to benefit it. He won't be able to sell those barrels. V'kishe'ein nitpas al knisato. And where the key is by the way, Rashi is telling us, because we're going to see shortly that this is a key element. We're talking about a situation where the non-Jew who is in with the barrels is not going to be arrested and grabbed based on his entering. Kiganav, like a thief, askinan. That's the case that we're talking about. Shahayalo chelik b'yayin. Maybe he owned a piece of the wine. The wine was kosher, and a non-Jew can own a right to the share of the wine without making it not kosher. Shahaya lo chelik b'yayin. De'i nidpas alav kaganav kulei shari. Because if in fact he was in a place where if he got into the wine, he would be very much arrested. Well, then he's going to be afraid of touching anything, and therefore everything would be kosher. So again, case number one, the non-Jew is locked alone with the wine, but there's a window in the door. As long as you could see the barrel, that barrel is kosher. If you can't see the barrel, that barrel is problematic. And as Rashi just highlighted, we're talking about a situation where the non-Jew who's there has a right to be there and will not get arrested for being involved with the barrels. So case number two. Case number two, we are now one, two, three, four, 8 lines down, middle of the line, fourth word on the line. Hahu chamra de Yisrael de habi yosef bevesa. So we have this wine that belonged to a Jew that was sitting in a house. Dahavid dayer Yisrael be'elyonah ve'ovikol kavim b'tachtona. It was a 2-story house, and in the upstairs was where the Jew lived. In the downstairs was where the idolater lived. And the wine, Rashi tells us, Yisrael be'elyonah ve'ovikol kavim b'tachtona. Third line in the narrow lines of Rashi. Now we're in the fourth line of narrow lines of the yayin b'tachtona. The wine was in the lower floor. The Yisrael ro'ehu milamala. But the Jew, it was structured. The structure of the building was such that either he had a window down into the lower level, or it was open down into the lower level, meaning it's where the ladder would be. He had visibility to where the wine was, and therefore he was able to watch the wine during, so to make sure that the non-Jew, the idolater, didn't touch it. So Shamu
Kriyat Torah.
What?
No, I'm just thinking there are some synagogues where there's a big hole in the middle of in the upper floor, so the women can look down and see Kriyat Torah.
100%. So okay, Shamu Kal Tigra. So what happens next? They hear because this room is used at 8:30. We gotta move today. So Shamu Kal Tigra. They heard the sound of arguing. And so Nafke, they went out to look and see, because you hear a commotion, you leave your house. Now the key is that the commotion was such that they are going out, and there are a lot of people outside, so they don't know whether one of them got back first or the other. So kadim asa ovikochavim achada l'dasha ba'ape. And again, the idolater happened to go in first, and he locked the door behind him. Amarava chamra shari. You know what? The wine is still permitted. Why? Meimar Amar, because he's going to say to himself, Kihechi de kadam asayana, just like I got up and went back inside, kadam va'asa Yisrael. The Jew went up and got back inside, meaning I don't know which of us got in first. And so as a result, yes, as it turns out, if we actually ask what was the facts, the non-Jew got in first. And so as a result, he really could have tampered with the wine. But he didn't know that. And so as a result, because he didn't know that, maybe he's upstairs and he's looking at me, and therefore I won't touch anything. So the bottom line is here we get the principle that again, if he's afraid to touch it, that's going to help us say that the wine remains permitted. Case number 3. So there was a particular inn where that was holding the wine that belonged to a Jew. And then it turns out that a non-Jew was found sitting among the barrels. Amar Rava says, Im nispas alav kaganav share. If in fact his touching any of the barrels would have gotten him arrested, well, then the wine is going to be permitted. Ve'ilo asir. But if not, if he had no concern, then it would be forbidden. And this was the point that Rashi highlighted earlier, that in the first case, we have to say that there was no fear. So the first 2 cases, there was no fear associated with it, because it was either it was the person was able to go there by himself, it was his house or whatever, but the bottom line is there was no fear. And in the second case, of course, it was his house, it was his level, it was his floor that had the wine in it, so there wouldn't be any issue with him approaching it. And so as a result, there was no concern with approaching the wine in those two situations. But if there was, well, then in all cases the wine would be permitted. All right, case number 4. Hahu besa dahabi yaseh bechamra. So there was some house where wine was being kept. Ishtakach ovikochavim dahav kavim but kaim beidane. And again, we find the idolater sitting among the barrels. Amarava. I islay leishtamute. If he had some excuse, chamra aser. Well, then the wine is forbidden. Ve'ilo chamra shari. And if not, if he had no excuse for being there, well, then again, he had no reason to be there. It would potentially be cause him to be arrested. So as a result, that's going to be prohibited. As Rashi tells us, here's why I went in. So samchadaita. So because he has this excuse, he's going to have a peace of mind. Velo mirtas, and he won't be afraid. Diki al lahachbe. So when he goes up into that house, miikara from the very beginning. Aidaita lenesuche. And but yet he went up from the very beginning in order to do a libation. Al. That's why he went up. The savar, and he thought to himself, mashkacho, if he gets found, mashkacholi, if he finds me, rather, ashtamitna, I'll give him this excuse. Va'afal gaf debimaga hayayin leisle lashtamute. And even though he has no really good excuse for touching the wine, asur, it's still going to be prohibited. De'ilav l'nesuche al, because if he didn't want to go up in order to do yayin nesach, in order to do a libation, lamale da'ayil, why would he go up at all? V'lo dami lemaniach oved kochavim bechanuto, and don't say, hey, this is Rashi asking a question. See you later. That hey, what about the case that we saw where a Jew leaves wine with an idolater in his shop, where we say that there is a certain amount of time that is required. Dahasam dekevan debereshus ayil, there, because the person had permission, v'yadinan lamai ayil, and we knew why he was there. We knew that the non-Jewish person in the store was there in order to watch the wine. Mm-hmm. So kol's man shalo hodiu shemaflik. So as a result, we don't. The key element that Rashi is highlighting is do we know why the person was there, and was it a legitimate reason? And if in fact we have a legitimate reason for the non-Jew to be there, well, then we can be more lenient. On the other hand, if we don't have any reason for the non-Jew to be there, then we're going to be in our case, and we need to be concerned. And so over there, mutar desaver, I nagana hashta asichazivili, asavachazili. Because he's worried that the guy's going to say, listen, if I go and touch it, he's going to come now and he'll see me. And so as a result, in that situation, that concern is enough. But here, once the guy has an excuse to be there, but he doesn't actually have a good reason to be there, so then we are going to say, oh, why is he there? He's there in order to make a mess of things and to cause it to be yayin nesech. Continuing on in Rashi. Rashi doesn't have a maskell, but we're just going to continue on because that's the next little bit explaining the rest of the Gemara. And if in fact he lacks such an excuse, well then shari, he's going to be permitted. The kevan debohol, because he's anxious, debohol al knisaso, because he came in, mirtas, he's going to be afraid. Velo naga, meaning if the guy has no excuse to be there and he's just being there, well, then he's going to be especially careful not to touch anything because he knows he's going to get in real trouble if he touches anything. And so, and not only for just not touching, for touching something, but even for being there. So while he might be able to, get off with a low punishment or no enforcement or something like that, the fact that he's going to get in trouble is going to be so preoccupying his mind that we don't have to worry about him touching the wine and making it into yayin nesach. So, Meisve, 1 second though, is this really true? I apologize. Yeah, that's exactly where we're up to. Meisve. So, Meisve, back into the Gemara. We are, okay. Meisve is smack in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 lines down in the Gemara, middle of the line. Meisve. So Meisve, Nigal Hapundak. So in a different case, if a O Sha'amar Lo Shemor, if a if a Jew leaves an idolater alone with his wine at an inn, or and the door was found to be locked, and then the Jew says to the idol worshiper, "Listen, guard the door." So asur, then it's all going to be forbidden. My lav avagav ashtamute. Isn't this a case where the non-Jew had no excuse for entering, and yet we say that the wine is all going to be prohibited, even though he had no excuse to go in there? So no, lo demute. No, it's where he did have an excuse. He had a way to get out of it, and so that's why, specifically in that case, also in that brisa, we're going to say that the wine is going to be prohibited. So the bottom line is if the person, the non-Jew, has an excuse to be with the wine, well, then it's going to be prohibited. Case number 5 for us. Now we have a Jew and an idolater sitting and drinking wine together. Now, presumably the Jew is watching, and in fact, we have to say that this is the case. The Jew is watching to make sure that the idolater doesn't touch his wine. We're going to see Tosfos has 2 different ways to understand this story. We'll see in a moment. Shama Yisrael kal tzaluya be'kanishta. The Jew hears them davening in the synagogue. So what does he go? Kam v'azul, he goes to join them. So Amar Rava, well, what about the wine that he left behind? Chamra shari, the wine that he left behind is permitted. Meimar Amar, because the idolater is going to say to himself, Hashta midchar lechamre v'hader. He's going to come back any moment. Meaning, I don't know. He didn't tell me that what he was going away for. Yeah, I know he's going to daven, but I don't know. Going to the synagogue, because he heard the synagogue and that's what called him away. But I don't know how long that's going to be, and so as a result, I have to be worried about it. Now, Tosfos offers 2 different cases here, 2 different possibilities. Shama, second to last Tosfos on the daf. The first Tosfos in the wide lines at the bottom of Ayin Amud Aleph. Shama Yisrael called Suluye. V'davka hayayin she'al hadolbeki. Only the wines that are in the cupboard that is it that he's going to say shari are permitted. Because remember, we saw back in the Mishnah yesterday that if in fact you are having a wine on the table with the non-Jew and you go out, well, then immediately the wine on the table is assumed you're having the wine with the non-Jew. He's going to take some more wine. He thinks that wine is for him to drink also. So he'll take it. So that will be immediately prohibited. But the wine in the closet that he doesn't have any rights to go and get because you didn't tell him, as we saw in our Mishnah, that when you hear the sound of the synagogue, it's not like telling the person, oh, I'm going away and I'll be a while. And let's take a look in Dalid. Dalid of the Hagos Habak tells us, Ubidelo Amar Lo, and it's where the person, where the Jew did not say to the non-Jew at the end, Havi Mosek Vishosa, go ahead and have some drink. He didn't say that. And so as a result, the stuff that's in the closet, as we saw in the Mishnah already, is going to be permitted. and the stuff that's out is going to be prohibited. Now Tosfos offers an alternative explanation. Again, it's key to go through, look at the Hagos Habach, because it makes a lot more sense using that language. Inami, in the Hagos Habach, sha'afilu ala shulchan mutar. Really, you know what? The case is about the wine on the table. And the situation is the Hachamairi shekol echad shosa miyaino, and each one has their own wine. And so the non-Jew is drinking his wine, the Jew is drinking his wine, and so as a result, now because they both have their own wine, so as a result, when the Jew gets up to go to shul, he doesn't need to worry about the non-Jew touching the wine, because the non-Jew thinks this guy's going to come back any moment.
Right.
I'm not going to touch his wine. I have my own wine. And so as a result, that's why Rava says that it's permitted. That's frankly, that's the explanation that I thought was the case when I read this Gemara. Okay. Hahu Yisrael, case number 6. Hahu Yisrael. Okay, 1 second. Let me scroll the screen, because now we've finished those first 5 cases. We're up to case number 6. So there we go. Hahu Yisrael ba'ovid kochavim dahavu yosivi ba'arba. There was a Jew and an idolater that were sitting together in a boat. Shama Yisrael kal shipure debei shimshe. And the Jew hears them blow the shofar and for sunset. Now, what shofar for sunset is that? I'm sure you probably already figured it out. It's talking about Erev Shabbos, and Rashi tells us that. If we take a look at the Rashi, it's right opposite the bottom of the Hagos Habach. Shipure debei shimshe shel Erev Shabbos on Friday. Shahayu token lahavdil ben kodesh l'chol. This is the blast that tells you, hey, Shabbos is coming, and it's a wonderful thing. You have this in Israel even today, where they have a siren that tells you, hey, Shabbos is coming. So now, and so the nafak also. So the Jew gets up, leaves the boat, and now he's left the boat with his wine, with the idolater all alone. So Amarava Chamrei Shari. You know what? The wine is still permitted. Meimar Amar, because the non-Jew is going to say, Hashta midchar le'lechamre v'hadar ase. He's going to realize that he left this valuable wine behind, and he's going to come back. The imishum shabsa. And if you think that it's because what about Shabbos? Meaning, what about the fact that it's Shabbos? As a result, as Rashi says, Shabbos, v'im tomar. That the idolater has a peace of mind that the person's not going to come back. The Jew's not going to come back on Shabbos. So in response to that, Ha'amar li iser giura. So Rav is going to tell us the story. So Ha'amar Rava said about that, Amarli Isur Giura, back into the Gemara. Isur Giura, Isur the convert told me, and of course Isur knows this because he was non-Jewish at some point. Ki avinan be'armiusan, when I was Amrinan, when I was an Arami, when I was an Aramite. So we used to say Yehudai lo menantre Shabsa, that Jews don't actually keep Shabbos. Because if they did keep Shabbos, to imanatre Shabbos, kama kise kamishtakche b'shuka, we would have found you can't carry on Shabbos. And how many times do people get stuck outside and they didn't realize it was coming? They didn't have clocks, they didn't have watches, they had to go based on the sun. And if it's a cloudy day, all of a sudden it's nighttime and you didn't even realize. And so as a result, people get stuck out in the shuk. And shouldn't they have to have left their wallets out there? And so as a result, the fact that we don't see all these Jewish-owned wallets all over the place every weekend, every Shabbos, that shows that the Jews must not really believe in this Shabbos thing. And they don't have any real problem with carrying. V'lo yadana. And the reason that he said that is that he didn't realize this like Rebbe Yitzchak. We actually hold like Rebbe Yitzchak, that if in fact you have a tremendous loss, the Amar Rebbe Yitzchak Hamotze Kiz b'Shabbos, if you find a wallet on Shabbos, Molicho Pachos mi'arba amos, you're allowed to carry it less than 4 amos each. In iterations, you carry it for just under 4 amos, and then you stop and you sit down, and then you carry it for a little more, and then you stop and you rest and you sit down, and that's how you can effectively only violate the rabbinic prohibition of carrying. And given the need that's associated with not leaving your wallet and all of its money and all of its security issues out on Shabbos, so that's how you'll get it home if you don't have an Eruv. And so as a result, he didn't realize that that was it. So as a result, all Jews are assumed to have the mentality that when it comes to money, and this, you can understand, this is plays right into every stereotype, right? When it comes to money, a Jew will violate Shabbos in order to get his money back, and so as a result, so there are some times where stereotypes are beneficial. And here we have an example of a stereotype that's beneficial. That because of that stereotype that the Jew is going to come back, the non-Jew won't touch the wine because he's worried that the Jew's going to come back, even though on Shabbos he won't. And so as a result, the non-Jew won't touch the wine, and therefore Rava says that it's all kosher b'yosher. Okay, case number 7. Hahu arya dahava nahim b'ma'atzarta. There was a lion, a lion that roared in near the wine press. Shama Ovid Kochavim, an idolater heard the lion. Tasha Beni Dani. So he goes to hide among the barrels. Amarava Chamra Shari. So the wine is all permitted. Because why is the guy there?
He's scared for his life.
Absolutely. Meimar Amar. He's going to say for himself, Ki heki de tashina Anna Itshanami Yisrael Achorai V'Kochazili. Listen, just as I'm here hiding and I don't see anybody, because nobody wants to be seen, right? The whole point of this is that we're all hiding. So as a result, the Jew is also hiding, and he might catch me if I do anything with the wine. Now, you might think he would want to do something with the wine because, after all, there are no atheists in foxholes. So as a result, he might be scared. But nonetheless, given the fact that he doesn't know that he's not being watched, as a result, he's going to not touch the wine. And therefore, the wine is going to be kosher. Case number 8. Hanu ganave disalke lepumpadisa upasku chaviyasa tuva. There was some thieves that came to Pumbedisa, and they opened lots of barrels of wine. Amarava Chamra Shari. You know what? Even though these thieves opened all this wine, all of the barrels of wine remain kosher. My time up. What's the reason? Why shouldn't we be worried about it? Well, unfortunately, Ruba Ganave Yisrael Ninhu. The most of these guys, of these thieves, happen to be Jews. And so that is going to lead us to case number 9. Now, this can be potentially counted as a part of case number 8. So depending on who you follow, it will determine how many cases we have, but we'll call it a separate case. Hava Ubda Benardai. Something very similar happened in Nahardai. V'amar Shmuel, and Shmuel said Chamra Shari. So, and he said that the wine was permitted. Come on. Who was he saying that it was permitted like? Karebi Eliezer. To Amar Safik Bia Tahor, that maybe you could say that this is all following Rebbe Eliezer. Now, what does Rebbe Eliezer say? We have to back up and remember a couple of things. When you have Safik Tuma in a public place, we say that you are going to be Tahor. So if there is a body buried somewhere on the Henry Hudson Parkway, but we don't know where, and you can't, and you could, it's not such that we know that everybody who goes over the Henry Hudson Parkway, you're going to violate it. So as a result, because it's a suffix, it's uncertain, because it's public property, because it's a public thoroughfare, we're going to say that uncertainty does not make anybody tameh. The person remains tahor. On the other hand, if it's in a private field, and we have the same thing, and you go into that private field, we're going to say that actually, yes, Safek Tameh, you are going to be Tameh. But this is a situation where Rabbi Eliezer says, you know what? I'm going to distinguish between two situations. Okay? That if in fact it's not clear, if you were in the area, but it's not clear that you went into that specific field, well, then I'm going to say that in that situation you're tahor. And only if you go into that specific field, then you're going to be tameh. So Ditanan, if you go into the open fields during the rainy season, and therefore that's not a place that anybody should be walking because things are growing, and as a result, it's considered Rishos HaYachid, and therefore Safek Tuma is going to be Tameh, Bituma Besad Plonis, and there is Tuma in one person's field. V'amar, halachti makom halaz. I went into that general area. V'eini yodea im nichnasti oso sadeh. And I don't know whether I went into that field or not. Im lo nichnasti, or whether I didn't. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Suffolk bia tahor, that in that situation you're going to be tahor, Suffolk maga tame. But if in fact we say that you went into that field, then you're going to be tame, because as a result, we're still unsure whether there's some uncertainty about whether you touched it in the field, but we're going to assume that you touched it in the field. Whereas the rabbis in that case say no. In both of these situations, you're going to be tummy, because they believe that if you went into the field where the actual field, then for sure you would have become tame. And so the doubt really is about going into the general area and not knowing whether you went into the field, and yet we'll still say that you're tame. So doesn't this show that just as with respect to tuma, so too Shmuel ruled with respect to wine? That here we have that it clearly they went into all of these barrels, but we don't know whether or not they touched it. So as a result, we're going to say, you know what? They didn't actually touch it. And so as a result, maybe they didn't touch it, and therefore we're going to say that all the barrels are going to be kosher. No, that's not a valid analogy. Shiny Hussam, the case over there is different. Kevan de Iska de Paske Lishum Mamona Havale suffix Sveka. No, why were all of these barrels opened? The barrels were opened presumably in order to look for money. They were not opened in order to check, in order to do wine libations.
And so Jews.
As a result, we have a double suffix. We have one uncertainty about whether or not the person who touched the wine is even Jewish, isn't even not Jewish. And then the second uncertainty is we have an uncertainty about about why they opened the barrels, and they opened the barrels in order to avoid, in order to look for money. As Rashi tells us, we'll do the last two Rashis on Ayin Amud Aleph. Kaven de Ika de Paske Chavios Lishum Mamona. That is, since they were just doing it in order to find the money, the Kaven de Chazul de Chamra. And once they found that inside the barrel it was just wine, parshe, they would separate it. To begin to read it, they were busy stealing. Velomanasche, and they weren't trying to do libations. And habis sveka. Suffolk Yisrael, Suffolk Ovid Kochavim. First, we're unsure whether the person who opened the barrel is Jewish or not Jewish. The imtim salom Ovid Kochavim, and if you even say that the person was not Jewish, Suffolk Naga, Suffolk Lo Naga. Maybe he didn't even touch the wine. And Baha, Afilu Rabbanan Modu. And even the rabbis would agree in that case. The Ki Pligi Rabbanan Ale de Rebbe Eliezer. And when do the rabbis disagree with Rebbe Eliezer? It's in the situation as follows. Heke Demalya Sada Tuma, where the field of the particular person that has the burial in it, that the entire field is Tameh. Di Allah, that if you were to go up into it, lo efshar de lo ha'ahil, that there's no way you did not make a cover over the location of the burial. Deleka elachad suffix. So as a result, there's only one suffix. And so as a result, Rabbi Eliezer says that in a situation where you're not sure you went into that particular field, we're going to allow you to be tahor, because we don't know whether you even went into the right field. Whereas the rabbis say, no, if the field is such that if you went into the field, you would certainly become tameh. Well, then we're going to say that since you don't know which field you went into, and you went into fields that are in Rishus HaYachid, we're going to say that you're going to be tameh. And both opinions, whether according to Rabbi Eliezer or according to the rabbis, can agree with Shmuel that the wine is permitted. Because here we have two sveikos. First, we have a suffix of whether or not the thief is Jewish. And second, even if the thief is not Jewish, maybe he was so busy with his thievery, he was not engaging in any touching of the wine. So that was case number 9. Case number 10. So we have a girl. This is a dispute between Rashi and Tosos. We'll take a look and let's see what that dispute is. Hahu Rabisa. There was a girl to Ishtakak to Hava Bedina the Dane that was found sitting among the barrels. Vahavas Nikita Ufya Bida. And in fact, she was found with wine foam in her hands. Amar Rava Chamra Shari. The wine is permitted. Amar Migabach the Chavisa Shkalte. She took the foam from the outside of the barrel. You know, sometimes some foam will come through the barrel or be left in remnants, and that's what she got, and that's why her hands are all wine colored. Va'af al gab deleka too, and even though there's no more foam outside any of the barrels, Amar itramuye itramela, that she just took all of it. So as a result, that's why it's going to be okay. And Rashi tells us, end of the first line, she took it from the outside of the barrels. The Davka Rabisa, and it's specifically, according to Rashi, only a little girl. De'eno Yodas, as Rashi says, first Rashi, Tinokes Ovedes Kochavim. We're talking about a little girl who's an idolater. We're talking about a real minor. V'davka Rabisa, specifically somebody that young. De'eno Yodas V'tiv Nisach. She doesn't know how to engage in libations. The lo masra nafsha, she's not gonna, risk herself, leminga, to touch something that she's not supposed to. Aval gedola, if she were an adult. Miki chazina de Nikita, once we see that she actually touched something, Nikita ufya, she touched the foam, lo talinan lakula. We're not going to be able to be lenient. Tosos disagrees. Take a look at the top Tosos, ayin and bet. Ha-hi revisa dehava. Havas Nikita Uvia Biyada Amarava Chamrashari. Perish Akuntras Stafka B'Tinokis, specifically with an infant. She'ena Yodas B'Tiv Nisach, who doesn't know how to engage in libations. The low Tarka Liga, and so as a result, she's not going to go out of her way to do the effort to touch. Aval Na'ara Gidola, Lo Talin and Lakula. We're not going to be lenient in that case. Miu, however, Lo Matzino Chiluksa. We never see this chiluk between this kind of minor and an adult. Although it's not quite true, because we did see earlier on that there is some distinction between a minor that knows how to engage in idolatry and one who does not. But I guess the point is that here the kid knows how to engage in idolatry and just not so well. So maybe that's the point that Tosas is making. In any event, b'shum makom, we never find that distinction. L'kein nira, therefore it seems to me, delav dafka rabisa. No, I don't think that it's specifically this, very young girl. Hua din gedola, same rule would apply to an adult. Ela de uvda haki, that just happened to be the case. Haki haba, that's what the case was. Umihu, but I will tell you the following, that leperish hakuntris, even according to Rashi, lo nafka mina idi midi akshav, doesn't make a difference at all now, because the gam hagedolim enam bekim betiv nisach. Because today, and if it was true back in the 12th century, how much more true it is now. It is the average guy on the street who's not Jewish has no idea how to engage in any kind of libation. They might be able to make up a process, but that's not what we're talking about. Okay, so that was case number 10. Back into the Gemara, case number 11. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. Ayin Amabet. Hahu, end of the line. Hahu pulmusa desalik Narda. There was a general who came into Narda, presumably with his army. Paschu, definitely with his army. Paschu chaviyasa tuva and they opened lots of barrels of wine. Kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, Uvda Havi Kamei to Rabbi Elazar V'Shara. There was a case just like this where Rabbi Elazar said it was permitted. V'lo Yadan, but I don't know. Imishum Desavar Lach to Rabbi Eliezer. Did he think like Rabbi Eliezer, as we saw just before, that if you don't know whether the person actually touched the wine and only whether or not the person came in, that we're going to say that that's going to be tahor? To Amar Savik be a tahor. That when we're unsure about whether the person entered something, it's going to be tahor. And imishum desavar, or maybe when this happened to Rabbi Lazar, imishum desavar ruba de azli bahadi polmusa yisrael ninu, or was it that the majority of the soldiers that came in with the general were Jewish? I don't know, because obviously in our case right now in Neharda, when they're going into the armies coming in, those aren't Jews. So I don't know whether I can apply this ruling over here. So hi Suffolk Bia, Suffolk Magahu. Well, 1 second. Why are you calling this an uncertainty about entry? This is real about whether or not the person entered the field. The person clearly entered the field. He opened the wine. So how can you say that? No, Kevin de Mifatche Tuva, since he opened so many barrels, since they opened so many barrels, Ema Adaita de Mamona Pascu, it seems likely that they were opening them for money, and therefore Ukasafik Biadami, and therefore, yes, it is technically we know that they came in, but it's almost like it's less of a connection to the wine, and therefore it's more like we're unsure whether they came into the field at all. Okay, and so next that leads us to situation number 12. Final situation. Hahi misovisa de masrala iklida. We take out the word maftacha. That's just a translation of iklida. It's a key. Lo ovedis kokavim. So a woman who sells wine gave her key to an idolater. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Uvda have a Beit Midrash Amru. So this actually happened, and we discussed it in the Beit Midrash. And Lo Masrala Ella Shmiras Mafteach Bilbad. The whole point of her giving the key was not to watch and to go into the store and thereby cause a problem for her. She was just going to watch the key, and therefore that's that we're not going to. The person would not have. The woman who is watching the key is not going to go into the store and touch the wine. She'd be worried about being considered a thief. So Amar Abaye af ananame tanina. In fact, you can see this in a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Tahoros. Parak Zayin Mishnah Aleph. Hamoser Mavtech La'am Aretz. If you give a key to an Am Haaretz, Taharosav Taharos. What you have inside that locked room that is Tahor remains Tahor. Lefishalo Masarlo Ela Shmiras Mavtech Bilbad. Because you didn't give him the key to watch the stuff inside the room. You gave him the key to watch the key. Hashta Taharosav Taharos. Yain Nesach mi boy. And now if the tar items are going to remain Tahor, certainly with respect to Yain Nesach, it'll be okay. 1 second. Are you telling me that Taharos is somehow more strict than Yain Nesach? Usually we say that Yain Nesach is very strict because it involves idolatry. Yes, actually, Tahoros can be more strict because listen to the following story. Chatzer shechaluka b'misipas, that if you have a courtyard where the courtyard belongs half to a chaver who is careful about Tahoros and half to an Am Haaretz who is not, Amar Rav says that if you were to split it, Taharosav Tmeos, that because the Am Haaretz is used to going into the other side of the field, he'll go into the other side of the field and touch the other guy's stuff, and we have to be worried about it. Uba Ovid Kochavim. But if in fact it was a non-Jew, Eino Osa Yain Nesach, we're not going to say that he'll touch the wine, and we won't say that it's Yain Nesach. So we see that there's a greater concern about tahor produce becoming tameh than there is with wine becoming Yain Nesach. Rabbi Yochanan says, well, once you split the field, av taharos av taharos, even the taharos item will be tahor. So we see that there's greater stricture, and therefore we can make the kal v'chomer that Abaye makes, and therefore we can say that yes, we have evidence that when you give a key to somebody, you are actually asking them to watch the key and not to go into the locked room and watch the items in the locked room. Meisvei, 1 second though, I'll give you a challenge. You hapanimis shel chaver, if the inner room becomes it belongs. So now this is a challenge on Rav's statement that in fact, if you split up the field, that a courtyard, that we do have to be worried about the non-Jew touching the tahor items of the Amaretz, touching the tahor items of the chaver. So, but listen to the following rule that's in a brisa. So Rav can't disagree with it, although we do say Rav Tano Upalik, but we would have to answer it that way. But and we don't want to answer that if we don't have to. So hapanim is shel chaver v'chitzonu shel amaretz. If you have an inner courtyard and an outer courtyard, and the inner one belongs to the chaver and the outer one belongs to the amaretz, osa chaver shoteach sham peiros. The chaver can put his fruit there. Umeniach sham kelim, and he can put his utensils there. Va'aval pishu yado shel adam shel am haaretz magash sham. And even though the am haaretz could reach it, it's okay, and it still all remains tahor. Kashel Rav. How can Rav say in a situation where you split the field that it would be tamei? So Amar Lach Rav would say, explain to you, no, shiny hasam, the cases are different. Shenispas alav kaganav. In the case where it's the inner courtyard, well, then the Am Haaretz is going to be arrested as a thief. Oh. And therefore, that's going to be different. Whereas in our case, because the divided is just a boundary marker, he could say something else. He could say that he was just measuring or doing something and he had some basis to be there. But because it's not a surrounded courtyard where the other place is the inner room. So Tashma, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Gago shel chaver l'mala migago shel am haaretz. Now we're going to ask on Rabbi Yochanan, if you have a roof of a chaver that's higher than the roof of an am haaretz, also chaver shoteach sham peros uminiach sham kelim, the chaver can put his produce there. Ubilvad shelo teheyado shel am haaretz magas sham, as long as the am haaretz can't reach it. Well, Kashya Rabbi Yochanan. This seems to be difficult to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that even if the divided courtyard only has a little marker and it's not on different levels, and you can leave your stuff there. So certainly you should be able to leave your stuff if you have two roofs that are basically the same height. And so as a result, no, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Lach Rabbi Yochanan would tell you, shiny husband, that case is different. De isle ashtamute, because he has a way of justifying his presence on an even-sided roof. Meimar Amar, Amtsure Kamamatsra. I'm measuring. I want to make sure that I'm doing my construction in a good way and I'm not going to interfere. And so as a result, he could come in, have a justification, and everything will be fine. But when it's a different level, that's why the roof is in that situation. He doesn't have the same justification, and therefore he's going to. Therefore, he would get in trouble, and therefore, if he, that's why the produce will remain tahor. So Tashma. 1 second though, continuing on in that brisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel had, we have also in that brisa Gago shel chaver b'tzad, Gago shel am haaretz. I'm sorry, Gago shel chaver b'tzad, Gago shel am haaretz. You have a chaver's courtyard, a chaver's roof, a chaver's roof next to an am haaretz's roof. So now this is the situation where it's all on the same level. Oto chaver shotech sham peros uminiach sham kelim. He can leave out his produce. It's all fine. Va'aval b'shu yado shel am haaretz megas sham. Even if the am haaretz could reach it. So kashel Rav. So now again, this is a real question according to Rav, because Rav said that in the courtyard situation you can't do this, and you have to be worried about it being tahor. So Amar Lach Rav would say to you, Lav Ika Rav and Shimon Gamliel. Dekai Kavasi. Yeah, you're right. This opinion in that brisa does not agree with me. But what does agree with me? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, where only if the roofs are of different levels. And if the roofs are of the same level, Ana de Amri Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. I agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So, oh, I'm sorry for not scrolling the last little bit. Here we go. And so, as a result, this brings us to the next Mishnah, which addresses soldiers entering a city in peacetime or during war and their impact on open and sealed barrels of wine. But for that discussion, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Yasher Kor, thank you.
Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Less than a week to go.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
You too. You too.